Have you ever wondered what England was like without a king or queen? It sounds like a modern political debate, but it actually happened almost 400 years ago. For a short, dramatic period, England was a republic, a commonwealth, led by a man who was not born to rule, Oliver Cromwell. This is the story of how a nation executed its king, abolished the monarchy, and embarked on one of the most radical political experiments in its history. So, how did England get to such a drastic point? It all started with the English Civil War. On one side, you had King Charles I, a firm believer in the divine right of kings, the idea that his authority came directly from God and that he was answerable to no one on earth. On the other side was Parliament, who argued that the king's power wasn't absolute. They believed he had to govern with the consent of the people, represented by them. This wasn't just a political squabble. It was a clash of fundamental beliefs about power, religion, and the very soul of the nation. Charles tried to rule without Parliament for over a decade, imposing taxes that many saw as illegal. Religious tensions were also at a boiling point. The king favored high Anglican rituals, which many Protestants, especially the Puritans, viewed as being dangerously close to Catholicism. They wanted a simpler, more purified form of worship. These disagreements eventually erupted into open warfare in 1642. The country was torn apart, with families and friends fighting on opposing sides, the Royalist Cavaliers against the Parliamentarian Roundheads, so called for their short, practical haircuts. In the early stages of the war, neither side had a clear advantage. But then, a figure emerged who would change everything: Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell was a gentleman farmer and a deeply religious Puritan. He wasn't a trained soldier, but he was a natural leader with an iron will and a genius for military organization. He believed he was doing God's work. Cromwell created something revolutionary: the new model army. Unlike previous armies, which were often poorly disciplined and led by aristocrats based on social standing, the new model army was a professional fighting force. Promotion was based on merit, not birth. It was highly disciplined, well-equipped, and motivated by a fierce puritanical zeal. Cromwell's Ironsides, his elite cavalry units, became legendary for their effectiveness in battle. With this formidable army, the tide of the war turned decisively in Parliament's favor. By 1646, the Royalists were defeated and King Charles I was a prisoner. But what do you do with a captured king? This was the million-dollar question. For years, Parliament tried to negotiate a settlement with him. They wanted to restore him to the throne, but with his powers severely limited. Charles, however, refused to compromise. He secretly plotted to regain his power, even trying to start a second civil war from his prison. For Cromwell and the army leaders, this was the final straw. They came to a radical conclusion: as long as Charles Stuart, the man of blood, was alive, England would never have peace. In an unprecedented move, a special court was set up to put the king on trial for treason. The trial was a sensation. Charles refused to recognize the court's authority, asking, "I would know by what power I am called hither." He argued that a king could not commit treason against his own people. But the verdict was already a foregone conclusion. On January 30th, 1649, King Charles I was executed outside the banqueting house in London. With one swing of the axe, 1,000 years of English monarchy came to a stunning end. With the king gone, England declared itself a commonwealth and free state. Power was supposed to be in the hands of Parliament, but the real power lay with the new model army and its commander, Oliver Cromwell. This period is often called the interregnum, meaning between reigns, but it wasn't a peaceful time. Cromwell had to brutally suppress rebellions in Ireland and Scotland, actions that remain deeply controversial and have left a dark stain on his legacy. Back in England, the new republic struggled to find its footing. The remaining members of Parliament, known as the Rump Parliament, seemed ineffective and self-serving to the army. Cromwell grew increasingly frustrated. In 1653, he did something even more dramatic than executing a king. He marched into Parliament with a group of soldiers and dissolved it by force, famously shouting, "You have sat too long for any good you have been doing lately. In the name of God, go!" So, with no king and no Parliament, who would rule? The answer was Cromwell himself. He was given the title Lord Protector, making him, in essence, a military dictator. He was a king in all but name. This was the start of the Protectorate. Was this what the Civil War was fought for? To replace one absolute ruler with another. It was a deep irony that wasn't lost on the English people. Life under Cromwell's Protectorate was a mix of progress and puritanical austerity. He pursued an effective foreign policy, strengthening England's navy and its position on the world stage. He also allowed for a degree of religious toleration for different Protestant groups and even readmitted Jews to England after they had been expelled for over 350 years. However, Cromwell was also a Puritan, and he aimed to reform the nation's morals. The Puritans believed that life should be devoted to God and that frivolous distractions were sinful. So, theaters were closed down, many sports were banned. Extravagant celebrations for Christmas and Easter were discouraged. For many ordinary people, this made life feel drab and joyless. While Cromwell himself was the killjoy he is often portrayed as, he enjoyed music and hunting. The overall atmosphere of his rule was one of strict moral seriousness. Cromwell ruled for 5 years. He was offered the crown in 1657, but turned it down, perhaps recognizing it would betray the very principles he fought for. When he died in 1658, the republic he had built began to crumble. His son, Richard, was named the new Lord Protector, but he lacked his father's authority and political skill. He was nicknamed Tumble Down Dick because his government quickly fell apart. Without Cromwell's strong leadership, the country descended into political chaos. The army leaders couldn't agree on a way forward, and the people grew tired of military rule and Puritan restrictions. They longed for a return to stability, for the familiar traditions of the monarchy. The experiment was over. In 1660, the son of the executed king, Charles II, was invited back from exile to take the throne. This event is known as the Restoration. The crowds that cheered Charles II's return to London were the same crowds that had watched his father's execution just 11 years earlier. The monarchy was back, and it seemed as if the republic had been just a brief, bloody interruption. So, was it all for nothing? Not at all. Although the monarchy was restored, it was never the same. The idea of the divine right of kings was shattered for good. Parliament emerged stronger and more central to the government than ever before. The events of the Cromwellian era planted the seeds for the future of British politics, paving the way for a constitutional monarchy where the monarch reigns, but Parliament rules. Cromwell's republic was a fascinating, turbulent, and ultimately failed experiment. But it proved that England could exist without a king, and it fundamentally changed the relationship between the ruler and the ruled forever. It's a powerful reminder that history is not just a story of kings and queens, but also a story of ideas, conflict, and the constant struggle to define how a nation should be governed. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think about this radical period in English history? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey back in time, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories from the past. See you next time.